Yes, hello, good evening. For those of you wondering, I'm Tom Chivers. I'm a Poole resident and Mark's son. And I've been asked to help serve as an informal chair for this evening, sort of fielding questions and discussions. So very warm welcome, good evening. And welcome to this Zero Carbon Dorset event, which is the first annual review of the Dorset 2030 report on living in a zero carbon county. To get us started, if I could just ask Neil, firstly, for those who may be unfamiliar with Zero Carbon Dorset, or would just like a brief reminder, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, summarising what Zero Carbon Dorset is, what its aims are, and the kind of work that you've been doing in the county.
Thanks for that, Tom, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for that intro. Yes, my name's Neil Smith. I'm one of the co-directors of Zero Carbon Dorset, along with Mark. So a bit of potted history. Mark set up the project a couple of years ago, and I came on board in the spring of 2021 when there was the pulling together information for the Dorset 2030 report. And subsequently, we set up Zero Carbon Dorset as a CIC based on a non-for-profit community and volunteer-based organisation. So the report we produced last year, comprehensive report, lots of input from people from around the county, lots of stories, and it was built on a vision of what net zero county could look like in 2030, and also create a happier and healthier place for us to all live and work. And when I say all, I mean not just us humans, but also, of course, nature, which is also under the cosh, as we well know. So the aim of this project is to use then an assessment-based way to inspire people to take action to tackle the climate and ecological emergency. So whether that's by local authority, by community groups, by businesses, or by education establishments, we all have a part to play. And we've used stories as a way to really demonstrate how much work is going on across the county, really inspirational work. But we need more of that to happen, and at pace, if we are to head off the worst impacts of climate change. And we use various media to try and get our message across. Obviously, these series of webinars, and those are now starting to make their way onto YouTube, so thanks to Matt for that. And we've also ventured into the great world of social media to help us reach a wide audience. And that is one of the key things, is to try and extend our reach beyond the usual bubble or green bubble, so that we can pull in and have conversations with people we wouldn't normally have those conversations with. And so that's a big push for this coming year. So I think that's enough of a summary of how we've got to, and I'll hand back to you now, Tom.
Great, thank you, Neil. Coming to you, Mark. I know who you are, but just a brief introduction may be very helpful. And Neil's given a very useful introduction to the report itself. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the maybe some more detail about the kind of analysis you used, the framework you used, the particular structure of the report, why you kind of chose to frame the report in that way.
Thanks, Tom. And in reverse, I'm Tom's dad. So just to, and yeah, as Neil said, I suppose I kicked off Zero Carbon Dorset, which really on the basis of thinking, when everyone was talking about needing to get to zero, the question in my mind is, where are we now and what do we need to do to get there? So I think that was the thing that was always in my mind, and I picked that up through various areas of activism and being part of the Climate Reality Project and a climate speaker. So that, I guess that's sort of the immediate background that brought me to this. And in terms of how we structure the report, what's the thing, I suppose, despite having been active for a few years, the thing that really focused my mind was being made aware of the Zero Carbon Britain reports that the Centre for Alternative Technology have been producing for more than a decade now, which show how we've already got all the technology, all the information we need to be able to solve this problem. And it's really just about a matter of political will to make that happen. And so the starting point really was thinking, okay, if they've produced a template there that shows how we could do it at a UK level, at a very simple basis, could we slice that down to something the size of Dorset? So we could, if what's the proportion the size of Dorset, and what could we do here? So that was the initial thought. But then actually you start thinking about what use is that information for people reading it. And what became apparent was really what might be of use is to spell out for each of those areas why it's a problem, what we need to do about it, and then maybe set a vision for what would it look like if we solved the problems around reducing our energy needs, producing it renewably, traveling better, eating better, using our land better, all of those things. Just slicing it up sort of as a sort of a statistical thing might be mildly interesting from an academic point of view, but it doesn't really give you much to go out there. So we said, well, okay, what would it actually look and feel like if we applied the sorts of things that were in the Zero Carbon Britain reports to a county the size of Dorset? And also because Dorset is sort of big enough where you can look at things like producing all your own energy. You can have a concept of, could we possibly feed ourselves as a county? It's big enough to have those types of discussions to make you think about the solutions. Not that we have to, but it's a useful size to think about that. So the report structure is really just that. It is a disaggregation of the Zero Carbon Britain reports, which is really looking at reducing energy, producing it renewably, using the land better, using transport better, and so on. However, the other thing you start to think of is when you look at it again, they're all still quite mechanical things. And what we do need to think about is things like, how do we make sure that it's fair when we apply all these changes? How do we make sure that people have the right policies in place to make them happen? And in particular, how do we think about education, both for the generation coming through schools and colleges now, but also for the wider population? So in our education chapter, we talk both about formal education and communication. So that's quite a long answer to how the chapters of the report came about.
Great, thanks. And it's interesting to hear particularly about the tangible, you call them mechanical. I think they're very practical and very useful themes through which the report kind of takes us of how can Dorset help contribute towards, or how can Dorset become a zero carbon county. And additionally, you then have in the kind of penultimate chapter, the chapter of justice for all. And I was wondering if you could just talk very briefly about what your kind of idea of climate justice is, and particularly how it applies to the report's vision for a zero carbon Dorset.
Yeah, this is one of the things, as I said, if you look beyond what's in the Zero Carbon Britain reports, and think, how can I apply this locally? There's a few things that come to mind. And I guess the starting point is that old adage about think global and act local. So the report is very much acting local, but it's probably the only place in the report where we talk about thinking global. So, we need to be aware from the urgency point of view that this is a crisis that's already impacting people across the world. So it's not something that's going to happen in future generations. Many people are already facing the dire consequences of it now. So it needs to reflect what's happening globally as a starting point. The other point for me, I think, which probably came to the fore around things like the Gilets jaunes protests in France around fuel tax rises, is that this isn't a problem you can just sort of tax your way out of. You can't sort of say, okay, well, these are all bad things, so let's just make them more expensive so people don't do them. We know that if you live in the rural part of the county, that the average car ownership is much more than the national average, and that's because public transport is poor, because you have to travel miles to get to any services. So people have to have two cars because in many cases, the family's traveling in one distance to the school and then going on to work in another place, and the other partner's working in yet another place. So you need those vehicles to travel around. So if you don't devise policies that actually help resolve some of those issues, then all you're going to do is alienate people, and your policies aren't going to stick, because you will have people protesting against things that are right. So it's about ensuring that when you look at certain solutions, the underlying example for that one would be, we need to dramatically improve public transport connections and provide services much more locally, so you get a win-win in that situation. I think the final thing is what's becoming more and more apparent in climate discussions internationally and with most campaigners now is the sort of issues of interconnectivity, that many of the factors that lead us to being in the problem that we have with the climate and ecological crisis are the same things that are causing the inequality crisis. They're the same things that are built on colonialism, on slavery, on injustice to different parts of the community. And so it's important that I think we recognize in the solutions that they can also, they could make things worse. For example, you could ignore people in other places in the world and historical things, but actually this is an opportunity to address things. And as we say in the vision, is that this really should be about making it a happier and healthier place for all, where people feel much more connected.
Great, thank you. I've read it. I really like the report. I feel I'm not being bribed to say that. It is a comprehensive, fascinating report. And as you've just described, not just that it covers the big vision of how all these issues are interconnected and why that matters, but the particular local analysis and evaluation of how they apply to Dorset. So you're now 1 year on from the report. And Neil, if I can turn to you and thinking a year on from when the report was first published, you've now prepared a kind of annual review on the county's progress of the evaluation you made a year ago. Kind of thinking now of the annual review, what are your kind of main findings? What are the key differences in your analysis, outcomes, recommendations? How are things stacking up compared to the report from last year?
Thank you. So we came up with what we have as 3 key findings from the report. The first is that if you look at the data, carbon emissions for Dorset, and just to emphasise what we mean by that is basically BCP and Dorset County areas, have actually decreased between 2019 and 2020 by 9%, which sounds very promising, but slight caveat. One is, of course, that data is now a couple of years old. And the second is that was in the pandemic. And the reason why those emissions went down is because people stopped travelling and businesses closed down. So it wasn't really anything to do with what was going on by our 2 local councils. It was more the reaction to the pandemic. And that was seen across the whole of the UK. In fact, 9% was what the UK was doing. And if you look at most of the reports, there's been this bounce back in terms of economic activity following the pandemic. And in fact, if anything, possibly bounce back beyond what was there before. So emissions have actually gone up. So if anything, things have got worse since. So it's you have to be so careful with the data. And so the key that came out for us was that whilst both local authorities have declared these climate ecological emergencies, they don't appear to be treating them as an emergency, not what we'd classify anyway. And we're really calling on them to step up to the plate to do that. And we stumbled over, thanks to one of our advisory board members that pointed out that the Climate Change Committee had published a report a couple of years ago, which clearly showed that local authorities either directly or indirectly can control 1/3 of the emissions in an area. So whilst our councils are rightly focusing on their own carbon footprints, they seem to have forgotten this other major role they have in terms of being a catalyst for action across the whole piece, so that they can get to net zero across the whole of the county, not just go for net zero in terms of their own emissions. And that, we feel, is an area that they've just not addressed. Second area really is around the business environment, which is that there was this great hope that post-pandemic we'd have a green economic recovery, and that would create lots of skilled jobs and take us down the route to our kind of, as we've said, this vision of a happier and healthier citizens. And of course, it's not happened, unfortunately. Oil and gas exploration and all that is still with us and shows no sign of abating. And in fact, if anything, our government and that of the US are actually expanding that exploration, which is obviously bad news. But we have managed to find and have reported on some good examples across the county where we can see the kind of the seeds of a green recovery, and that's to be welcomed, because it is absolutely essential that happens, and that provides the skilled green jobs which we know will follow, to sort of build the momentum that we need across the whole county, and is kind of part of the economic reason for driving down towards net zero that otherwise people might balk at. But if we can demonstrate actually there's good jobs at the end of this, and a better quality of life for people, then that's a much more palatable way of saying things than just saying, no, you can't do this or do that. And then third, we've got loads of really good, inspiring stories from across the county, from community groups, businesses, the local authorities. And it's really key that we focus on those, because we want to inspire people to take action. And this, we feel, is the best way to do that, is to point people in the right direction and say, this is happening on your doorstep. You don't have to go off and invent this stuff. It's happening here. Go and talk to Bridport about what they're doing about community food, or go and talk to Wimborne Win on Waste if you want to talk about litter picks, or you know. So these groups already exist. They're doing great work. We just need it to happen a lot faster and more of it. So the second part, I guess, of your question, which was about how does it differ to last year's report? Well, of course, I'd like to say that in our assessment across the topic areas, we've seen a great improvement, but sadly, that's not the case. We have found not enough evidence that we have moved the dial on any of the topic areas. So unfortunately, that's stayed pretty much as it was. The big change, I think, is that, and hopefully this is because we took on board feedback that we received, is that last year, as we said, was a real comprehensive report. It was a bit of a beast, not only to write, but for people to actually digest. And so we took the active decision to slim it down. And I think we've achieved that, although some people might think there's still too many words, but we've at least got it down to a more bite-sized chunks, shall we say. And we also asked people, you know, what in our webinars over the last year, what the priorities should be. And again, we've reflected that at the end of each of the chapters by just honing in on 3 key things that should happen, because I think people just lost that in the baseline report. It was, as I say, all singing or dancing, and was a bit of a beast to consume. The third thing, that the difference is that our advisory group said we needed to be absolutely clear in our executive summary as to the key findings for the report, to help people, particularly those people who frankly haven't got the time or the wherewithal to wade their way through the entire report, to kind of do that summary. And that's the 3 key findings that I've just outlined, but it really helped sort of sharpen us up a bit more about what we're trying to say to people, and where the call to action is. Again, we focused on stories from around the county, so there's a similar in that respect. But I would say, and in my finishing point, is that we are very much open to feedback about the report and different ways that we could go about presenting information so that it's more palatable to people, and also looking for stories. So we're reaching out to those people across the county, and if you've got us a good story, then please tell us, and you'll be in next year's report.
Great, thank you, Neil. Comprehensive kind of summary of what we can look forward to in the annual review. Particularly encouraging to hear that despite the kind of disappointing situation of the kind of the authorities' lack of progress and the wider national disappointing status in moving towards these very important and vital initiatives, that there are encouraging stories around the community, around the business environment. So I thought I'd just ask from each of you, well, starting with Neil, I suppose, this kind of story or the community initiative that's most stood out to you in the last period.
Well, of course, I would say, as one of the co-authors, that they're all inspiring stories, which is why they made the cut. But no, if I had to hone in on one area, I'm going to get pitch on land use, because I just think it's such a vital area in terms of producing good, healthy nutritional food, which gives an income to our farmers, but also protects our wildlife. Absolutely essential. And if we can do that, we can also hopefully get them to take up carbon and get this nature recovery that we so desperately need at the same time. So, in terms of tackling both the climate and ecological crises, then this is essential. And the story that I've gone with is the work that Dorset Wildlife Trust are doing at Wild Woodbury. And I've chosen this one for a couple of reasons. One is that it just demonstrates that if you take what was an intensively managed farm out of production, it doesn't take very long for nature to actually come back and recover. And 1 year on, they're already seeing species coming back to that piece of land. And the plans for the future are really exciting in terms of continuing that work, bringing cattle in to help. So there will still be some production on that farm, but also, of course, what's being shown elsewhere is that cattle are great for breaking up the soil structure and allowing species to come in to get different habitats to support species. So that's all really important work. And then this year they're talking about looking at the Sherford River, and which has its headwaters actually in the site, and then for being able through work to encourage retention of water on the land will actually have a real beneficial effect, again because of habitat creation, but also nutrient reduction going down into Poole Harbour, which is as we well know is such a fragile and important ecosystem, and that's got to be to the good too. So some really exciting work there. And sort of linked to that, we hosted a webinar about land use back in October, and we had a couple of MSc students from Bournemouth University talking about the opportunities for different land uses in terms of sequestering carbon. And one of their case studies was about what might be possible on Wild Woodbury if they continue down this route. And it was really heartening to hear the potential there is for that carbon sequestration, but also taking it to the next step, which was making people think about, well, we've got all these companies and businesses saying we're going to achieve net zero by 2030 or 2040 or whenever, but they're not really too sure how they're going to do that, because whilst they'll do the best, we hope, to mitigate their own emissions, the chances of them getting down to zero are, frankly, in that timescale, unlikely. So they're going to have to look around for ways to demonstrate how they're going to get carbon trapped. And so this kind of research is going to be absolutely essential to demonstrate what the potential is. And the last reason why I'm kind of promoting this one is that Seb Haggett, who worked on with Dorset Wildlife Trust, came along to our Planet Wimborne Green Festival and gave a superb talk, and that really showed, as I said, 1 year on, what had been achieved with little or no intervention on behalf of the trust. So it demonstrated really, what is possible, and it's on our doorstep. It's not like listening to people talking about what they're doing up in the Lake District. Fantastic though that is, but it's nice to see it down here in Dorset. And wouldn't it be great if we could get more of the land around to adopt similar kinds of approaches and so that we could join up corridors for wildlife, so they can then move around, and then that's got to be a good thing in terms of the nature recovery, which we also need. So that's it from me. That's my pitch.
Great, thank you. And I've had a great comment from Belinda, which I suppose I can read out for the purposes of the recording. And Belinda says that Dorset Council has made a rapid improvement and change in their attitude since February, and that they are finally politically committed to their nature recovery, climate and ecological strategy. There is also the sustainability checklist and the listed building guidance, and they are consulting with the public on these now, getting it rolled out to the rest of the county and getting town and parish councils to adopt the measures, and using the decision wheel, which puts the NCES at the heart of decision-making, is the next challenge, which I think we can all definitely agree with. Mark, same question to you about stories or initiatives that have impressed, inspired you over the last year.
Yeah, I mean, it can sound glib, but everyone you read where you see there's individual people, most, not probably the majority, I've not counted them, on a volunteer basis, or certainly not in, for sort of huge financial gain anyway. Right across all of the areas, right across the county. There's a story of a little cafe in Burton Bradstock this time that's doing great things with locally sourced food. As Neil says, I think all of the rewilding things, and it's the it's great to see some of the videos around that, and the reintroduction of beavers in the west of the county. All those things are really great. I suppose the one thing I would draw out that's sort of subtly different and links to my earlier points around the justice chapter was a feeling of hope when it was reported around what the university have been doing, or they hosted an event, combined climate justice and fair trade event, and hosted a debate with not just the BU but a number of other universities who escape me at the moment. But I think what I found quite inspirational about that is we heard during the year about some of the things that Bournemouth University are doing, both on campus in terms of just getting their own act together, but also through the curriculum, where they're making sure that the SDGs are sort of sustainable development goals are getting included in all of the courses in some way, and they're assessing that. But this also seems to be a way in which they're engaging students as well in having that debate. And so it fills me with hope that we're moving slightly beyond the sort of core sustainability debates and making sure that the sort of wider picture is understood by people. So that was one that that really stood out to me.
Great, thank you. And sticking with you, and then thinking ahead to what's coming in the future, what's happening over the next year, what does Zero Carbon Dorset have planned? How do you plan to kind of spread the good word of the report, the work you've been doing, get people more engaged, and ideally to emphasize the urgency of some of the evaluations you've made and the important work that can and needs to still be done?
So there's a couple of things, I guess, that come to mind. I mean, I think most people here will be aware that we're planning this community-led COP for Dorset on September the 9th. I won't have seen much yet, because it's still quite a way ahead, but we should have more detailed information out on that probably later in May, where we'll bring all the community together to discuss many of the things we've touched on tonight, but also to find ways that we can continue to take action and increase it at scale and pace, as Neil's already said. One of the things that is in this report is a much more explicit offer from us to come out and share the sort of findings with community groups, the sort of underlying, I guess, motivation for why we do all of this is a belief that we need to engage more people in the debate. We need to widen the debate. And so an offer to come out to, other groups, probably the groups that people are members of on here probably don't necessarily need to hear it, but what are the other groups that we're connected to that can have this? I mean, I've done a talk recently at a Christian association in Southbourne, at the Arts University. So those sorts of areas are reaching out to more people. So that's an explicit offer in this year's report that we will come out and, you know, share that to try and bring more people into the debate. We're also going to try and continue to work on social media. We're fortunate that Lizzie and Beth unfortunately couldn't be with us this evening, but the work they're doing, they know what's going on social media. They understand all the statistics that sit behind it, and they're able to tell us what works and what doesn't. What appears to work really well is little video clips. So I think we need to do more of those, because people do share them around. Continue working with the councils. Belinda's comment in the chat is one that, again, actually I have to say, was a sort of late surprise and a very welcome one when we saw the update from Dorset Council. Again, we know, you know, these things are still at the sort of still planning stage, if you like, but there definitely seems to be some momentum there. There seems to be a willingness to do it. And I think the other thing is there's a stark difference between what's going on in Dorset now and what isn't going on in BCP. So I think that's an interesting thing. But our offer remains there to try and find ways that we can link up community groups with the councils through the report and what we're doing to try and do that there. Yeah, and the other places is all the social media channels and our YouTube channel, which I think Neil had already mentioned.
Great, thank you. And then just lastly, turning to Neil, for people looking to get more involved in Zero Carbon Dorset, want to contribute to different projects or events, what can they do? How can they help? Where can they find out more?
Yeah, thanks, Nat. So various ways. So, I mean, people are already on this webinar, so they're probably well familiar with our monthly webinars, and also hopefully subscribe to our YouTube channel and have watched our videos and liked them and made comments, because that makes Matt very happy, and also means that we'll be able to get this spread the word more widely. Yeah, I mean, if they're not already members of Zero Carbon Dorset, it's obviously sign up to hear about what's going on. Read the reports that we produce, let us know what you think and how they can be improved. That's back to what I said earlier, and help produce next year's report. We're always looking for the willing or otherwise volunteers to come along, and we've been very fortunate, as Mark has already alluded to, with having Matt, Lizzie and Beth, and Abby as well should get a mention as well, when I'm on our advisory board, who produced a very colourful depiction of what the future Dorset could look like, which we've included in this year's report. Send us your stories, again, what I said earlier, and very importantly, just tell others about our project, and so we can try and reach those hard to reach people who are not part of the conversation yet. So that all good ways to get involved.
Neil, I will jump in, because you did remind me, actually, it's one of the things in terms of how we can spread the news as well, I think, is that Abby's drawing continues to go down well, as I said to her, actually irritatingly well, because now every time I'm doing a presentation, the first comment I'm getting afterwards is not all of the other slides and talks I've done, but wasn't that drawing wonderful, and how can we use it? And even today, I think I've had 2 separate emails from people asking how they can get a copy and how they can use it. So as Neil said, it is in our, we've made it front and foremost in the executive summary in the report, because it's been such a great step forward. But I think it's also that subtly different way of engaging with people. For those people who don't like reading reports, it's a great way to start the conversation.
I'll pass back to Mark and Neil for any closing comments.
Well, just to say thank you, everybody, for your ongoing support and being here this evening. Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Tom, for hosting us.
Yeah, just echo those comments, and thanks for coming along, and to Tom for stepping in and being our excellent host this evening. Thank you.